Psalm 51, 10 through 12, International Standard Version. God, create a pure heart in me and renew a right attitude within me. Do not cast me from your presence. Do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and let a willing attitude control me. This may be a well-known passage to many of us. It's a passage of lament and confession from the heart of David. As I was researching these verses, one commentary stuck out at me, and they briefly touched on the uses of the different verbs in verse 10, create and renew. If we think about the verb create, in layman's terms, it means to make something out of nothing. In the Message version, it asks that God create a Genesis week out of the chaos in David's life. If you think about Genesis 1:1, God created the heavens and the earth out of a void, out of nothing. David understood that God needed to completely transform his heart and make it clean. He knew that because of his sin, he had no chance at a clean heart without God performing a miracle in his life. The next verb that we encounter is renew. This is a term that means to return something to a former condition. David was yearning to return to the peace of living in God's will. In the next phrase, he begs, "Restore to me the joy of your salvation." He had previously felt joy and peace that comes only from righteousness with God. But sin had messed that up, as it always does. One of my previous Read and Reflect recordings was on a passage in 1 Samuel where God is talking to Samuel about David. If you remember, God sent Samuel out to Jesse's house and said, "I need you to go find the next king of Israel." Well, Samuel saw some of David's older brothers and thought for sure one of them would be chosen. However, God reminded him that we see the outward appearance, but God sees the heart. In this passage in Psalms, David is pleading for God not to cast him away and overlook him. He is begging to remain in God's presence and for God to restore the relationship they once had. God does perform this miracle, and it is a miracle. Only God can create a pure heart out of sinfulness. As Acts 13:22 says, God testified concerning David, son of Jesse, a man after his own heart. You can blame my mom for this, but I'm a person who loves to dissect words and phrases. I'm sure this is obvious every time I make a recording. I like to look at different translations and compare the words that are used to try to get different viewpoints of the author. In this translation, notice the use of the word attitude. Now, I have a preteen daughter. When I hear the word attitude, typically it's in a negative connotation. One of the phrases heard quite often in my house is, "Watch your two, dude." In my own head, the word attitude is negative. In this passage, David uses it in a different way. He asks God for a right and willing attitude. David is asking God to change his behavior and his way of thinking to have an attitude that better points to God. So obviously, this is a prayer that does not just pertain to David. This is a passage we all should utilize every day. What do we do with this? David answers that question with the next verse. Psalm 51:13 says, "Then I will teach transgressors about your ways, and sinners will turn to you." It is our job as ambassadors of Christ to live as an example to others. There's a song that says, "They will know we are Christians by our love." We should be so filled with God's love that we can't help but bubble over to the people that we come in contact with daily. This week, spend some time praying over and thinking about Psalm 51. Make it a daily reminder to be in such close relationship with God that we constantly yearn for the joy of His salvation and for us to have a willing attitude for Him.